Hello everyone, welcome back. In this discussion, we'll focus on consumer behavior. We'll talk about why individuals make the choices they do. Economists believe that consumers are utility maximizers. In other words, consumers try to get the highest level of satisfaction from the goods and services that they consume. But in order to consume certain goods and services, you have to have resources. That means any decision regarding how many units to buy depends on the budget constraint that we face. Our budget determines what and how many of each unit of goods and services we can purchase. So when we talk about utility, the key here is the definition of utility. Utility is a measure of the satisfaction or benefit that results from the consumption of a good. This terminology is used for the sake of consistency. So utility means satisfaction or benefit. Utility is measured in terms of what economists call utils or units. So utility measures what the level of satisfaction is when you consume a certain good. But in order to get a certain good, you have to have, like as I said earlier, the necessary money or resource. Therefore, any decision regarding what goods to purchase and how many of each good to purchase depends on the amount of money that you have or the amount of budget you allocated. Therefore, consumers maximize their utility or consumers maximize their satisfaction subject to a budget constraint. They have some constraint they have to deal with. So with taking into consideration the budget constraint they have, the amount of money they have, they want to allocate their resources in such a way that they can get the highest level of enjoyment from the goods and services that they are consuming. So in this discussion, what we are trying to do is we are trying to investigate how people go about allocating this limited resource or budget in order to enable them to buy a bundle of goods and services that give them the highest level of satisfaction. So for the sake of discussion, let me show you what the income level is at an average in the United States for different years. You can see here from 2008 to 2011, you can see that number of consumer units, in other words, number of families. Here you have about 120 million families in 2008 and about 122.3 million families in 2011. So this is the number of families that we have in the United States. When you see the income before tax, you see that the income before tax in 2008 was about $63,563, and in 2012 is almost the same. It's about $63,685. These 122 million families will have to make a decision to allocate this limited income in terms of what goods and services they are going to buy and how many of these goods and services they are going to buy so that they can get the highest level of satisfaction for the resource that they have. So when we see how this money or the income that people generated in the US was spent, this is what you see. What you notice here is out of the income that people generated back in 2011, about 13% is spent on food. And then you see that about 0.9% is spent on alcoholic beverage, and housing took about 33.8% of the income. And then when you come down here, education, for example, took about 2.1% of the income. The clothing, about 3.5% of the income. Transportation took about 16.7% of the income. And then other things, for example, we have spent money on healthcare, which is about 6.7%. Pensions and social security took about 10.3% of our income. So people have decided to allocate their income in a certain way, and when you add up this allocation, it will add up to 100%. So we make decision on how we are going to spend our money across all goods and services that we purchase every day, every month, every year. So in order to make this allocation, we have to consider our choices. For example, we can choose to spend all of our money on food. That means 100% of our income will be spent on food, and then we have nothing left to buy any of these other things listed on this table. Or one may decide to spend all of their money on housing. They can spend 80% of their income on housing. Instead of here, the average is 33.8. In other words, you can have a big house, so many bedrooms, and you are spending 80% of the income on the house. What that means is you have to cut your spending in other areas. Probably you have to cut your food spending. You can't afford to go and get higher education. You may have to cut your spending on pension and social security. So whenever you increase your spending in one area, it comes at the expense of another area because you don't have unlimited resources. You are constrained by the budget you have. So if one spends more on one item, they have to necessarily reduce the consumption of one other item or many items from their choices. So it's always a trade-off. We have limited resources. We have to allocate these resources in a certain way in order to get the highest level of satisfaction. So when you spend your resource on one area, on food or housing or transportation or healthcare or entertainment, it means you have less money to spend in other areas. The process of making choice is to find that allocation, that bundle that gives you the highest level of satisfaction, that gives you the highest level of enjoyment. So how do people go about making this allocation? In order to do that, I have chosen simple numbers and basic examples. Let's assume here you have a budget of $10. You have budgeted $10 instead of $60,000 or $60 million or $10,000. Let's just simply focus on small numbers, $10. Your total budget is $10 for two items, for burger and bus tickets. Burgers cost $2 and bus tickets are 50 cents. So you have $10, that's the maximum budget, and you have burgers and you have bus tickets that you are planning to buy with this $10. The price of burger is $2 and the price of bus tickets is 50 cents. So what this means is you can spend your entire dollar on burgers and you can get 5 burgers, but then you don't have any money left for bus tickets. So 5 burgers, 5 times 2, $10, then nothing is left for bus tickets. Or you can choose option B, where you buy 4 burgers for $8, 2 times 4, and now you are left with $2. With those $2, you can buy 4 bus tickets. Or you have another choice, choice C, where you can buy 3 burgers for $6, and you can use the remaining $4 to buy 8 bus tickets. Or you can choose to buy bus tickets, 20 bus tickets for $10, but no burgers. So you have many options, thousands of options between A and F to allocate your $10. In other words, if we were going to break this into pieces, you can buy 4.25 burgers and then you can use the remaining money to buy 3 point some bus tickets, right? But we don't use decimals here. In reality, there are other options between A and B. When you change the number, for example, if you push it up from 10 to 100, then you will have many options between 4 and 5. So in order to account for those things, what we are going to do is when we graph these numbers, when we graph this A, B, C, D, E, F, this is supposed to be E, A, B, C, D, E, F, then what we do is we will just simply connect the two lines A and B to form a line to account for all the thousands of options that you have between A and B. But for now, for our purpose and to make the calculation easy, let's just choose these 6 options, A, B, C, D, E, F. So you have A, 5 burgers or no bus tickets, or 4 burgers and 4 bus tickets, 3 burgers, 8 bus tickets, 2 burgers, 12, 1, 16, and 0, 20. If I want to represent this information in a form of graph, what I will do is I will measure burgers on the y-axis, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 burgers, and then I will measure my bus tickets on the x-axis, 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. If I don't spend any money on bus tickets, I can buy 5 burgers. So that's option A, 5, 0. Or if I choose to buy 4 bus tickets here, I have to reduce the number of burgers that I am consuming. So the burgers drop from 5 to 4. So I'll be on option B, where I have 4 burgers and 4 bus tickets. But if I further increase the consumption of bus tickets to 8, now I can't afford to buy 4 burgers. I have to reduce my consumption of burgers from 4 to 3. So I'll end up at C. But if I choose to use all of my money for bus tickets, I can buy 20 bus tickets, but no burgers, 20 and 0, F. So when you connect all of these dots, you get this straight line here. So this straight line represents the budget constraint, the maximum bundle of these 2 items you can buy for the amount of money you have for the $10. You cannot exceed this constraint or this budget line. This is called a budget line that tells you the limit, the maximum you can consume. You can't come up here where there is 5 burgers and 4 bus tickets. In that case, you would need $10 for the burgers, just for the burgers, and then you need $2 more for the bus tickets. That means you need $12, which you don't have. So anything above the budget constraint is something which you cannot afford. But anything below the budget constraint and on the budget constraint, you can afford. For example, you can be somewhere here, right here, 4 bus tickets and 3 burgers. That means you will spend $6 on the burgers and $2 on the bus tickets. That means you spend $8. The only problem with that is you had $10 but you spent only $8. Therefore you are not efficient. You have $2 left that you could have used in order to increase your level of satisfaction or enjoyment. So you have $2 that are left over in that case. So if you are below the budget line, we say you are inefficient. You are not using all of your resources. Above the budget line, you can't afford it. You don't have enough resources. When you are on the budget line, then you are using all of your resources. You are spending all of your $10. Like as I said earlier, points between A and B represent other fractions that we are not computing here. But those are viable options as well if the market allows it. If there is any way to sell 4.5 burgers, then we have to account for that. Here is 4.5 burgers, and then you can buy maybe 2 bus tickets, right? So if you account for those kinds of things, you have to connect the dots from A to F to form this line, which we already called the budget line. So this budget line tells you the budget constraint, the constraints you have in order to buy these 2 goods, burger and bus ticket. Now the question is, how do you go about selecting the bundle, the option out of these 6 options, the options that gives you the highest level of satisfaction? The first option is to buy all burgers and no bus tickets. The second is to buy 4 burgers and 4 bus tickets. The third is to buy 3 burgers and 8 bus tickets, or you have another option where you can buy 20 bus tickets and no burgers. Now, which one of these is the best option? The answer to that question is, it depends. For example, if you have nowhere to go to, you have no need to buy a bus ticket, probably the best allocation would be option A, where you buy 5 burgers and no bus tickets. But let's say you have to go to work and you need 20 bus tickets for, let's say, 4 days. In that case, you may not buy a burger, you may spend all of your money on bus tickets. So option F could be the best option. So which one of these options is the best option depends on your existing situation. So in order to make that decision, you have to go beyond taking the price and the budget constraint. So we'll see how people go about allocating their resources in the most efficient way. In order to do that, what we have to do is, in addition to price and budget, how many units of each item you can buy for that specific price and for the amount of money, we have to bring into the picture the level of satisfaction each one of these bundles gives you. So your objective is to find the bundle that gives you the highest level of satisfaction. Like as I said, if you have nowhere to go to, there is no satisfaction you can derive by getting a bus ticket. Therefore, the level of satisfaction you get from a bus ticket will be 0, but there is a positive satisfaction you will get from eating burger. Therefore, that may be the best allocation. In order to find out the bundle that gives you the highest level of satisfaction, we have to introduce into this model the utility or the level of satisfaction you get from each item. So now let's talk about utility. When we talk about utility, we have a concept called total utility. Total utility measures the total satisfaction that you receive from consuming a particular quantity of a good. In other words, what's the level of satisfaction I get when I eat 1 burger? The total satisfaction. What's the total satisfaction I get when I eat 2 burgers or 3 burgers or 4 burgers or 5 burgers? That's the total utility. It tells you the total number of satisfaction, the total unit of satisfaction that you get from consuming a certain quantity of a given product, a given good. What's the level of satisfaction I get when I have 20 bus tickets? What's the level of satisfaction I get when I have 16 bus tickets, right? So that's called total utility. But we have another concept called marginal utility. Remember, we talked about marginal analysis. When we talk about marginal utility, we're talking about the additional utility. What's the additional utility that a person receives from consuming an additional unit of a particular good? In other words, instead of saying, what's the total utility I get when I consume 2 burgers? Here, I'll say, what's the additional utility I get when I consume the second burger, right? That one additional burger. What's the level of satisfaction I get when I consume the 3rd burger, the 4th burger, the 5th burger? When you do that kind of analysis, when you do that incremental analysis, when you ask the question, what's the level of satisfaction I'm receiving when I consume one more unit of the item, then you are computing marginal utility. The formula for marginal utility is change in total utility divided by change in quantity. In other words, here in our example, what's the additional utility I get? For example, when you go from 1 to 2, change in quantity is 1. So if I gave you the total utility figures, you will find the total utility when you consume 2 burgers, the total utility when you consume 1 burger. You find the difference between the two. Total utility here minus total utility here divided by 2 minus 1. That gives you the additional utility that you derive from the additional burger. So the formula for marginal utility is change in total utility divided by change in quantity. So now let's take the numbers we already have and add total utility. Here what I did is I divided the information into 2 sections. The first section gives you an information about the burger, and the second section gives you information about the bus tickets. So here we said, okay, a burger, you can buy no burgers, you can buy 1 burger, you can buy 2, 3, 4, or 5. These are the options you have. So now we measured, somehow we were able to find the level of satisfaction that the person, the consumer, gets from consuming this burger. And the information is given here. Remember, there's no calculation that goes into coming up with this number. These numbers are made up. These numbers are made up to tell the story we want to tell. So what we said is we had some way, some mechanism to measure the level of enjoyment, the level of satisfaction the person is deriving from consuming the burgers. So here you see that when there's no consumption of burger, there's no satisfaction to be derived. So 0 burgers, 0 utility. But we are saying here, if the person eats 1 burger, they get 10 units of satisfaction. That's their total utility, total level of satisfaction. Remember, here we are not considering the budget constraint yet. We are just simply stating the level of satisfaction the person gets from consuming burgers. So when they consume 3 burgers, their level of satisfaction becomes 24 units or 24 utils. If they consume 4 burgers, their level of utility will be 28 units or 28 utils. If they consume 5 burgers, then they will get 30 units of satisfaction. So what you see here is, as you consume more, your level of satisfaction also increases. You see that it was 0, 0, 1, 10, 2, 18, 3, 24, 4, 28, 5, 30. So as Q goes up, or the number of units goes up, total utility or total satisfaction goes up too. It tells you that more is better. That's what this says. When you have higher number of an item, your level of satisfaction is also greater to a certain extent, like we will see. But what you see here is total utility is generally upward sloping. In other words, when you have higher number of units, you have higher level of satisfaction. From 1 burger, you get only 10 units of satisfaction, but when you eat 5 burgers, you get 30 units of satisfaction. Now what we need is we need to compute the marginal utility or the additional utility from each burger. In other words, here I want to find out not the level of satisfaction that I achieve when I eat 2 burgers, but I want to find out what the level of satisfaction is when I consume the second burger, when I consume the 3rd burger or the 5th burger. In order to do that, I have to use my formula for marginal utility. The formula for marginal utility is change in total utility divided by change in quantity. So when I go from 0 to 10, my utility changed by 10, right? Change in total utility is 10. Change in quantity is from 0 to 1, quantity changed by 1. So 10 divided by 1 gives me 10. So my marginal utility is 10 here. The first unit gives me 10 units of satisfaction. How about the second unit? When I consume 2 burgers, my level of satisfaction went from 10 to 18. It jumped by 8. My number of units that I consumed went up by 1, from 1 to 2. This doesn't have to always go up by 1. Like we'll see, it can go up by more than 1. Here, it's going up by 1. So this total utility increased by 8. Total utility increased by 8. Quantity increased by 1. 8 divided by 1, 8. So now, when I consume the third burger, my total utility went up from 18 to 24. It increased by 6. My consumption of burger went up by 1. So 6 divided by 1 gives me 6. So you see that marginal utility is listed here. One thing that you notice is, as we consume more burger, the additional satisfaction that we get from each additional burger, or the marginal utility, is going down. So it's opposite to what we said here. When we talk about total utility, when you consume more burgers, you get more satisfaction from all of the burgers added up together. So total utility will go up. But when you evaluate the marginal utility or the incremental utility, what you see is each time the number of units that I consume goes up, the additional level of satisfaction I get from that additional burger is going down. So marginal utility is declining. So total utility is going up, but marginal utility is going down. So 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. So you see that total utility goes up with quantity, but marginal utility goes down with quantity. So total utility goes up, total utility is generally increasing with quantity, but marginal utility, the additional level of satisfaction that I get, is going down as I consume more of the same item. This is described by the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility says as you consume more of something, the additional utility you get from the additional or one more unit of that item goes down. In other words, the fifth burger is not as good as the first burger in terms of the level of satisfaction it brings for you. So that's what they say. So marginal utility declines as you consume more of an item. In order to make the analysis or the understanding of efficient resource allocation, we need one more information here. That information is how much money we pay for each unit of satisfaction that we get. Because, for example, when I get 10 units of satisfaction from the first burger here, and if I get 10 units of satisfaction from something else, the two levels of satisfaction are equal, but the items cost me a different price. Therefore, in order to find out if I'm getting a good deal or if I'm ending up with a bad deal, I'll have to take my marginal utility, the additional utility I get from the additional unit of that item, and divide it by the price of that item. That gives me what's known as marginal utility per dollar. Per each dollar I spend, how many units of satisfaction I'm getting. This one is telling you from each burger I ate, what's the level of satisfaction I'm getting. The first burger is giving me 10 units of satisfaction. The second one was giving me 8. Here on this column, what I'm trying to find out is when I spend $1 on a burger, how many units of satisfaction I'm getting. Therefore, what we do here is we take the marginal utility and we divide it by the price. That gives us what's known as marginal utility per dollar spent. Per each dollar I spend, how many units of satisfaction I'm getting. So here, 10 divided by 2 will be 5. 8 divided by 2 will be 4, 6 divided by 2 will be 3. Like you will see, since marginal utility is declining, marginal utility per dollar is also declining because price is constant and the top part is declining, so this will be declining. So this gives you marginal utility per dollar. So we will do the same thing for bus tickets. We know that here the bus tickets, I can buy 0, 4, 8, 12, 16 or 20 for $10 that I can buy the combination of these two, or I can buy 20 bus tickets and I can buy any number of combinations that the $10 will enable me to acquire. But now the additional information that I need in order to allocate my resources in the most efficient way is the level of satisfaction I get, the level of enjoyment I get. Remember, bus tickets, here enjoyment is loosely defined, right? Enjoyment is not like the level of enjoyment you get from the bus tickets is not the kind of enjoyment you get from a burger, but it's a benefit. That's what we're trying to measure. The bus ticket, you buy a bus ticket because it gives you some benefit. We call it satisfaction, enjoyment, a benefit. So the level of benefit that you get is measured by total utility. So when you have no bus tickets, you don't get any utility out of it, any satisfaction, any benefit, so it's 0. But if you have 4 bus tickets, we said you get 16 units of satisfaction. If you had 8 bus tickets, we said you get 28 units of satisfaction. 12 bus tickets will give you 36 units of satisfaction. 16 bus tickets will give you 40 units of satisfaction. But then, once you get 16 bus tickets, probably you have made all the travels you could make that week. Any more bus tickets don't add any utility to you. So the total utility remained constant from 16 to 20. That means you can travel only so much, right? 16 to 20. So these numbers, like as I said again, are made up. But what you see here is when you have more bus tickets, your level of satisfaction generally, until you get to this point, has been increasing. So the relationship between quantity and total utility is generally positive. When you have more bus tickets, you get more satisfaction. Again here, in order to make our analysis, we have to be able to compute what was known as marginal utility. So let's compute marginal utility from the bus tickets. Here I put B. Marginal utility from burger. Marginal utility from bus ticket. So when you do the marginal utility from bus ticket, what do? Just like before, you find the difference in total utility and you divide it by the difference in quantity. So when your quantity went up from 0 to 4, change in Q is 4. Total utility went up from 0 to 16, change in utility is 16. So you take 16, change in utility, divided by 4, your marginal utility is 4. When you get from 4 to 8, your total number of bus tickets went up by 4 and your total utility went from 16 to 28 by 12. So 12 divided by 4, your marginal utility is 3. When you went up from 8 to 12, your number of bus tickets went up by 4, so change in quantity is 4, and your total utility went up from 28 to 36 by 8. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So now you have 2. When you increased your bus ticket to 16, if you had 16 bus tickets, you will get 40 units of satisfaction. In other words, you have 4 more bus tickets and you get 4 more additional utilities or units of utility. 4 divided by 4 gives you 1. Once you get there, your utility didn't change, it remained 0. Your bus ticket went up by 4. 0 divided by 4 is 0. So you see here again, marginal utility is characterized by the law of diminishing marginal utility. When you consume more of one thing, the utility that you get from each additional unit of that same thing has gone down successively. So here you see that 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So now again, in order to find out the per dollar level of satisfaction, you take the marginal utility and you divide it by the price of that specific item. In this case, the price is 50 cents. So you divide 4 by 0.5, you get 8. 3 divided by 0.5, you get 6. 8, 6, 4, 2, 0. This will tell you the marginal utility per dollar. So now you have all the information you need in order to make a decision which bundle of all the bundles that we saw. These are the bundles that we have. We didn't know which one of these 6 choices to select, right? Because we didn't know what the level of satisfaction that we get is from consuming each bundle. So in order to find out that bundle that gives us a higher level of satisfaction, we introduced utility. In other words, we identified the level of satisfaction we get from consuming each of these items. So now we have all the information we need. We considered budget, we considered utility, so we can make the decision as to which of these bundles will give us the highest level of satisfaction. Before we get there, let me show you what happens when you take the marginal utility and the total utility and graph them. This is what they look like. The total utility is upward sloping generally. It goes up at a declining rate, right? It's going up and at a declining rate. So what you see here is your number of burgers. As you eat more burgers, your total utility is increasing, so it's moving up. So that's what you see on this line. It's moving up, right? But then what we said about marginal utility is as you consume more burgers, each additional burger brings you less number of units. So the marginal utility is declining. So you see that marginal utility is downward sloping. While total utility is upward sloping, marginal utility is downward sloping. This downward sloping marginal utility curve shows what we earlier referred to as the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility says the marginal or the additional utility gained by consuming successive units of a good will decline as the amount consumed increases. In other words, the satisfaction you get from the fifth burger here is not as high as the satisfaction you get from the first burger. Remember, both burgers have the same quality. You paid the same amount of money for each of them. However, after having eaten 4 burgers, the satisfaction you get from the fifth burger is not going to be as high as the satisfaction you get from the first burger. Because when you think about it, the first burger, let's say it's lunchtime, you are hungry, so you get the first burger. The first burger that you eat immediately when you are hungry gives you the highest level of satisfaction than the second burger that you get after you have already satisfied your need initially. So with the law of diminishing marginal utility shows that the satisfaction, the utility, the benefit that we get from more of something goes down as we acquire additional successive units of that specific item. Why the marginal utility diminishes, or why we have the law of diminishing marginal utility, is because in allocating our resources that have variety of uses, we use the first unit to satisfy the most urgent want. For example, you go out and work, you earn a certain amount of money. Now you have many uses for that money. You can spend it in many different ways. According to the law of diminishing marginal utility, you will use the first however many dollars in order to satisfy the most urgent wants. For example, you may pay the first $700 to pay rent for your apartment. And then you will go and use the next $700 to buy something else which is important but not as important as paying the rent. Therefore, you see that the use of the second $700 is not as urgent as the use of the first $700. The benefit or the satisfaction you get from the first $700 is greater than the satisfaction or the benefit you get from the second $700. Remember, both $700 are equally useful. However, in allocating your resource, you first allocate a certain amount of money to satisfy the most urgent one, and then you will use the remaining amount to satisfy the less urgent ones. Therefore, when you allocate your resources, you start by using those resources to satisfy first the most urgent one, and then you go to the least urgent one, and eventually, for example, after you paid off your rent, after you purchased the food items you want, after you paid off your transportation, now you use the leftover money, for example, for entertainment purpose, right? So now entertainment may be important, but it's not as important as paying your rent or buying your food. So the amount of money that you spend, let's say you spend $50 per month to go and watch movies. So if you spend $50 at the movie theaters every month, those $50 that you spend at the movie theater are not as important as the $50 that you use to pay as part of your rent expenditure for the month. Therefore, the $50 that are included in your rent are more important than the $50 that you are spending on entertainment. So the $50, the first $50 give you a higher level of satisfaction than the last $50 that you are going to spend on movie theaters. Therefore, we say the law of diminishing marginal utility is something that people face in allocating resources that have a variety of uses. So now we know what utility is, we know what the law of diminishing marginal utility is, and we understand that we need to consider both our budget constraint and the level of satisfaction we get from different bundles of goods and services that we can buy with that budget. Now, how do we go about selecting the bundle that gives us the highest level of satisfaction? That's the topic of our discussion next time.